Birmingham City have had quite the decade. With the League Cup win in 2011, there hasn't been a dull moment since.
Alright, getting all defensive, I didn't say it was you, did I? I was just repeating something from the other day, that's all.
Here's the story of Birmingham City. After finishing second in the Championship in the 08-09 season, under the management of Alex McLeish, Birmingham were promoted back to the Premier League at the first time of asking, and the club then had the task of re-establishing themselves as a top-flight side. Around this time, Hong Kong businessman Carson Yeung completed his takeover of Birmingham, and at the time it was reported that some of his appointees had had run-ins with the law, but more on that later. In their first season back in the Premier League, they exceeded all expectations by finishing 9th, with the signings such as Scott Dan, Roger Johnson, Barry Ferguson and Craig Gardner. The following season though was a little more dramatic. They started out well, going unbeaten in their first 4 matches, and throughout the year they picked up points against the likes of Liverpool, Man City, Man United and Chelsea. Although the main story came from their League Cup run. On their route to the final they beat Rochdale, MK Dons, Brentford, Aston Villa and West Ham before facing Arsenal in the final. Going into the final there was talk about a potential Arsenal treble, with the Gunners currently sat just behind Man United in the table. They were the overwhelming favourites coming into the game, but Birmingham hadn't read the script. Nikola Zigic gave Birmingham the lead before Robin van Persie equalised just before half time, and then in the second half, with only minutes left, Obafemi Martins pounced on an Arsenal mistake to give Birmingham the League Cup trophy. In the league at this point, Birmingham was sat 14th in the table, but by no means were they safe from relegation. A bad run towards the end of the season meant that they were dragged down into a relegation scrap. Ben Foster told this story on the Peter Crouch podcast about President Carson Yeung trying to inspire the players to win one of their final matches.
Carson Yeung, do you remember that guy?
Yeah.
He only ever came into the stadiums a few times, and came in to see the lads, but his English was zero. He couldn't say a thing, honestly. It was about 2 or 3 games before the end of the season, and we're in trouble. We're facing relegation here, and they've gone right. The owner wants to come in and just say a few words before the match. Bit of a sort of morale booster. Eventually, it went quiet. All these kind of guys came in with him, and he walks in, and he's a bit like Elvis. He's got these white silk, like snooker referees. They wear those white gloves. Yeah, he's got a pair of these white gloves on, and the stuff he wears, he's got to be an Elvis fan anyway. He walks in, and you can see he's nervous, and it's all quiet. It's so weird, and he doesn't say anything, and everyone's thinking, what is going on? And eventually he just blurts out, "Win," and that's all he says. He says "win," and then he just stops and walks out. That was genuinely all he could say. That's all he could muster was "win."
Unfortunately, that inspiring speech wasn't enough to keep Birmingham up, who went on to lose 5 of their last 6 matches and were relegated back down to the Championship. They finished the season on 39 points, which would have been enough to keep them up in each of the last 10 Premier League seasons, but this time round, it just didn't quite cut it. The plan was to stick by manager Alex McLeish, although he himself quit the job via email and just 5 days later would join local rivals Aston Villa. Birmingham then had to go in search of their next manager to guide them back to the Premier League. I feel good. Chris Hughton was appointed as the next Blues boss, and after he had guided Newcastle back to the Premier League, there was the same expectations with him at Birmingham. As well as managing the league campaign, Birmingham had also qualified for the Europa League via winning the League Cup, and so they had that to contend with too. They ended up finishing 3rd in their group, just 1 point off qualifying for the knockout stages, but considering their demanding championship schedule, they had put up a good fight. They went unbeaten in their final 9 league matches of the season and went on to finish 4th in in the table and then had a playoff semi-final against Blackpool, who they were relegated alongside in the previous season. Although on this occasion they would be unsuccessful as Blackpool beat them 3-2 on aggregate. At the end of the season, Birmingham then gave Chris Hughton permission to speak to Norwich, where he would then take over as manager, and Birmingham were once again left searching for another manager. Next season was significantly more difficult for Birmingham. With the club having financial issues, they were placed under a transfer embargo, and so they were forced to sell some players in order to generate funds. After spending last season out on loan, Ben Foster was sold to West Brom for a fee of around £4 million, which then paved the way for Jack Butland to step up as Birmingham's number one. They also sold Jordan Much to Cardiff, as well as releasing several other players that summer. Thanks to these sales, the embargo was lifted in July, and they brought in the likes of Hayden Mullins, Darren Ambrose and Peter Löwenkrantz, as well as bringing in Ravel Morrison on loan for the season. Come January, and Birmingham were struggling and were sat 20th in the table. Facing an injury crisis within the squad, Stoke signed goalkeeper Jack Butland for a fee of around about £3.5 million, and as part of the deal, Butland would return to Birmingham for the rest of the season on loan. Thankfully, Birmingham managed to turn around their form, and having only lost 4 of their last 18 matches, they went on to finish 12th in the table. The next season, and things were even more difficult for Birmingham, on and off the pitch. Club president Carson Young was facing 5 charges of money laundering in relation to sums totalling to £55 million. And after numerous delays to the trial, he was found guilty and sentenced to 6 years imprisonment. He then stepped down from all his club-related positions in February 2014. And on the pitch, things weren't much better for Birmingham. Due to Carson Young's assets being frozen, they were forced to sell key players in order to generate funds. Marlon King, Hayden Mullins, Nathan Redmond, Darren Ambrose and Steve Caldwell all departed. Throughout the season, Birmingham lingered around the relegation zone, and they went into the final day sat 22nd in the table and needing some kind of result against Bolton and for Doncaster to drop points. Doncaster were playing Leicester on the final day, who had already been crowned champions. A win would have guaranteed them safety, but after David Nugent scored a penalty in the 75th minute, their place in the championship was suddenly at risk. When Nugent made it 1-0 to Leicester, Birmingham had just gone 2-0 down to Bolton, but Birmingham just wouldn't lie down and were able to produce one of the most unlikely comebacks, with Nikola Zigic making it 2-1. Paul Caddis then stepped up in the 93rd minute, and the rest is history. Birmingham survived on the final day thanks to goal difference, with Doncaster going down. So next season, Birmingham would still be playing their football in the Championship, but it wouldn't be without its difficulties. Peter Panu was the club's chief executive who oversaw everything after Carson Young's arrest. With the current financial situation they found themselves in, they had to dip into the free agents market to rebuild the side. They did pick up some gems though, particularly Clayton Donaldson, who went on to score 16 goals that season. But Birmingham got off to a poor start in the league and were sat in the relegation zone at the end of October. Lee Clark was sacked, and after his dismissal they lost 8-0 at home to Bournemouth and were sat 23rd in the league table and in need of a miracle. Gary Rowett was appointed as the new boss, and he immediately put his stamp onto the team. Michael Morrison joined on an emergency loan and then signed a 3.5-year deal with the club in January. Rowett did well and only lost 2 of his first 15 games in charge, and after finishing the season well, he guided Birmingham to a comfortable 10th place finish. The following season, and things finally started to trend in the right direction for Birmingham under Gary Rowett. They spent the whole season in the top half of the Championship and even flirted with the top 6 before going on to finish 10th for their second consecutive season. It finally felt like there was some stability within the club. The 16-17 season rolls around and Birmingham are hopeful to kick on and challenge for the top 6. They bring in the likes of Che Adams, Ryan Shotton and Greg Stewart, and they start the season well, only losing one of their opening 11 matches. Around this time, Trillion Trophy Asia completed their takeover of the club, and after doing so, they appointed 3 new boardroom members. Shortly after this, with Birmingham sat 7th in the Championship, just 3 points off 3rd place and sat outside the top 6 only on goal difference, they made the unbelievable decision to sack manager Gary Rowett. It was claimed that the board had sacked him after Rowett had turned down a new contract extension.
This is where the fun begins.
He is then replaced by Gianfranco Zola, who admitted that he had been approached for the Birmingham job some time ago. The Birmingham Mail reported at the time that the players were left fuming at the decision to sack Rowett with how well the side was doing in the league. Zola was appointed by the board with the intention to play more expansive and attacking football, but things would quickly unravel for the Italian. Zola didn't win any of his first 8 league matches in charge, and Birmingham quickly tumbled down the table. In an attempt to turn things around, they brought in Lukas Djukovic and Kerem Fry in January, but they weren't enough to turn around the wretched run. Birmingham continued to lose matches, and the pressure mounts on Zola. After a 2-0 loss to Burton Albion, Zola hands in his resignation, having won just 2 of the 24 matches he was in charge of. Birmingham are sat 20th in the table and are once again in danger of being relegated. In comes Harry Redknapp to save the day, who is offered a contract until the end of the season. With 3 games to go, Birmingham are sat just 3 points above the relegation zone. Redknapp loses his first game in charge against local rivals Aston Villa before winning his second game 2-0 against Huddersfield. Going into the final day, they need a win to guarantee survival, with Blackburn sat just 2 points behind them. Birmingham went on to beat Bristol City 1-0 on the final day, thanks to a Che Adams goal, to guarantee their place in the Championship for next season. Around this time in 2017, Dong Ren is added onto the club board, and he would eventually go on to become the club's CEO and main face, but more on him later. After keeping them up, Harry Redknapp is offered a new 1-year contract, and he is heavily backed in the transfer window, with the club spending over 15 million on the likes of Jota, Harley Dean, Maxine Collin, Mark Roberts, Craig Gardner, David Stockdale and Chekan Doy. It was hoped that the club would kick on this season, but after Redknapp lost 6 of his first 8 matches, he was sacked in September, with Birmingham sat 23rd in the table. Things start off reasonably well for the new manager, who wins 2 of his first 4 matches in charge, but once again, things quickly go downhill. They couldn't score goals, players were being played out of position, and after a poor run, they sunk to the bottom of the table in December. After they lost 2-0 to local rivals Aston Villa, the pressure was really starting to tell on Cotterill, although he did give us this David Brent impression in one of his press conferences.
So it was the 77th minute before you decided to make a substitution.
It wasn't me that asked that.
Why do you think that then?
That wasn't me that asked that.
All right, getting all defensive. I didn't say it was you, did I? I was just repeating something from the other day, that's all.
After this, things only got worse for Cotterill, as Birmingham went on a 7-game losing streak. After their 2-0 loss against Barnsley, they slipped into the relegation zone, and Cotterill needed a police escort to get to the tunnel, as the fans voiced their anger at the manager. On the 3rd of March, after a 2-1 defeat to Nottingham Forest, Cotterill was sacked by Birmingham, with them sat 22nd in the table. Garry Monk was brought in as his replacement and immediately went about making changes by reintroducing Djukovic and Jota into the starting 11. After picking up a string of results towards the end of the season, he guided Birmingham to a 19th placed finish. The following season, and there was once again plenty of turbulence off the pitch. They pursued a deal for fullback Christian Pedersen, but were originally unable to register him to the squad due to the club being placed under a transfer embargo by the EFL. This was due to a breach in the profitability and sustainability rules which were introduced in the 16-17 season. Clubs are allowed to report losses of up to 39 million over a 3-year period, and Birmingham had incurred losses of over 48 million between 2015 and 2018. A large portion of the losses came for the transfer transfer fees they had paid for players whilst Zola and Redknapp were in charge, as well as a rapid spike in their wage bill. Eventually, Pedersen was able to sign for Birmingham, but the club was still restricted in the other players they could sign. Despite the disruptions off the pitch, Birmingham started off well in the league, having only lost 2 of their opening 15 matches. Che Adams formed a brilliant partnership up front with Lucas Djukovic, and the team finally seemed to have its identity back. But there was still some drama to come. On the 10th of March, Birmingham played local rivals Aston Villa at St Andrews. Blues went into the game sat 8th in the table, 2 points ahead of Villa. In the first half, a Birmingham fan ran onto the pitch and punched Jack Grealish in the back of the head. The fan was then sentenced to 14 weeks in prison and the club was fined £42,000. To compel the misery, Grealish then went on to score a second half winner and after the game described it as the best day of his life. Shortly after this, the EFL deducted 9 points after their financial fair play breach, which plummeted Birmingham down the table and left them just 5 points off the relegation zone. Monk was able to steady the ship though, as Birmingham went unbeaten in their last 7 matches and finished 17th despite the point deduction. After the season had finished, it was reported that the relationship between Dong Ren and Garry Monk had broken down. Ren was said to be unhappy about the club's play style and Monk's plans for the future, while Monk was left unhappy after the sale of Jota to Aston Villa. Monk was then sacked to the anger of Birmingham fans at the time. Pep Clotet, who had worked under Monk, was then given the job. Chadham's departure then paved the way for several Spanish additions, as well as the likes of Ivan Sunjic, Dan Crowley and Jeremy Bella. Pep tried to implement a progressive attacking system, and although the early signs were promising, Birmingham quickly tailed off in the league. The biggest story from this season came in the form of Jude Bellingham, who made his debut to become Birmingham's youngest ever player at just 16 years and 38 days. They turned down a £20 million bid from Manchester United in January and the teenager took the league by storm, winning the EFL Young Player of the Year award. In the second half of the season though, things had gone stale for Pep Clotet, who was sacked in July. Steve Spooner and Craig Gardner took over until the end of the season and Birmingham then finished 20th and were then in search for their next manager. Aitor Karanka was the next man through the door. The big sale this summer was teenager Jude Bellingham, who completed a move to Borussia Dortmund for a fee of around £25 million. Birmingham then made the decision to retire the number 22 shirt, a decision that it's fair to say was laughed at the time. But Bellingham was a major success story for the Birmingham Academy, which made the announcement that they were going to scrap the academy for all under 17 levels even more baffling. As the season went on, pressure grew from the fans on CEO Dong Ren to step down as Birmingham continued to struggle in the league. After a poor run of results and months of dull football, Aitor Karanka was sacked, with Birmingham sat 21st in the table. In comes Blues legend Lee Bowyer, who arrives from Charlton. He goes on to win 5 of the final 10 matches of the season and Birmingham secure their place in the Championship with games to spare. Shortly after the season's conclusion, Dong Ren announces his resignation from the club after almost 4 years at the helm. And that concludes the story of Birmingham City. Birmingham head into the 21/22 season under the management of Lee Bowyer and hopeful of what's to come next. But if the last 10 years are anything to go by, it'll certainly be full of drama. That's all for today's video though guys. If you did go on to enjoy, make sure to leave a like and stick around for some more Championship content. Thanks for watching.